Hello viewers, welcome back in my channel. So today we know a new concept of educational research. So today's concept or today's topic is historical research. So today's topic is historical research. Historical research. This topic also totally based on the research topic. So history becomes is past events, which research has already done, and this is and developed concept of conclusion. This historical research is totally based on the past events and the developed concept of the conclusion. So when a researcher collecting data from the past events or past oriented research, that time she must be aware about the data on this research were totally based on the past events, or in this research types the researchers must be aware to collect the data or collect the source of the data. So there are some sources of data collection. So there are some sources of data collection. Sources of data collection, DC. Okay, data collection. So there are some sources. So what is the source of the data collection here? We know clearly. So at first the data collections is individual source. Number one is individual source. Individual source. So what is the individual source for the data collection? When a researcher want to collect some data about his research, so that time she depends some sources. Those sources also the primary source. Those sources also the primary source. So those sources also the primary source, and there are the another source. Number two is the secondary source. So at first we talked about the primary source. So primary source number one is the individual source. So individual, in this word we can say that they are a individual who is the individual and who is the give the data to the researcher. So the primary source or individual source here, the some is the family background, some is the deed, some is the origin of the family. So etc. are the individual sources. Next, the number two source are official source. So in this here we can conclude that, or you can notice that this official source is totally based on the when the researcher collects some data from the official background or official perspective, that times it is the official source. So number three is the oral source. When a researcher collecting data from the oral perspective or oral venue, that times it's called the oral source. Oral source of any family background, like any poet, etc. So those are the oral sources of primary data collecting. Next, the primary sources of data collecting is number four is instrumental source. So what is the instrumental source for data collecting? So there are the instrumental source. There are some instrument like gadgets, like video recorder, like tapes, like any kinds of deeds, any kinds of fossils. So those are the instrumental for the data collecting source. So next is the number 5 is pictorial source. Pictorial source. Pictorial source. So we can notice that pictorial source means there is some pictures also related here. So the researcher, when collecting the data from this pictorial source, he must be aware this is the primary source of the data. So we are clarifying here those 5 items also the primary source of the historical research. So now we know about the secondary source. So we know about the secondary source. One, secondary source. Secondary source. Sources. So in this here, when a particular individual person is not directly involved in this past event related things which had occurred previously, but he has some clear cut idea on this topic or on this matter, as well as he must be read some novels, read some books and writing some notebook for those times. So those are the historical research secondary source. So it is here the some who was not involved directly. This man is not involved directly on that time directly, but he also read about it. He has collecting data for this particular subject, and he know the background of his. So those are the secondary sources included here. So there are the main 2 sources of the collecting of data about the historical research. So number 1 is the primary sources and number 2 is the secondary sources. And next we know about the types of the historical research. So types. So types. Types of historical research. So in this here has 4 types of the historical research. So those are number 1 bibliographic research. Number 2 is the legal research. Number 3 is the studying the history of ideas, and number 4 is studying the history of institution. So we know those types is separately. So number 1 is the bibliographic research. In this here the bibliographic research is when some educators, when some life achievement oriented things also said by the any educators or any human being who know about those matter on which is occurred in the historical times or the past times or past events. This is the bibliographic research. And next is the legal research. So legal is the based on the part which is the based of the legally value, which is a legally value or is a value oriented. So someone say that the teachers are the valuable persons in the society. So in this here the legal research is the teacher talk or teacher value is the legal person, legal research events types. So next is the studying history of the ideas. So in this here the history of the ideas is the some persons who has the clear cut idea of this historical background and he has no award and know about these historical events. So this is the historical ideas of these times. And next is the studying the historical institutions. So in this here the historical institutions has some importance to the historical research. So those are the types of the historical research. Now we know about the steps of historical research. So now we know about the steps of historical research. So there are some steps of the historical research. We know that there are the research when occurred, there are some occurred in the some steps. So in this year the historical research has some steps, and those are the number one is selection the problem. Number two, formulation of hypothesis. Number three, collection of data. Number four, interpretation of data. So those are the steps of the historical research. So at first is the selection of the problem. At first the researchers want to identify or want to be research on a particular problem. At first he must be aware on the particular problem, and first he selection the problem. Next is formulation the hypothesis. In this area big questions, the historical research has not used the hypothesis, but sometimes of historical research use the hypothesis and sometimes use the objectivities. So in this here the researchers must be formulated the hypothesis or the objectivities. Next, the collection of the data, as well as when the researchers know about this problem is clearly, then he must be aware to collecting the data. And next he is aware for the interpretations of the data, which data he has collected from the society or collecting from the selected areas. So that times he must be aware, and he would be interpreted the data for further research. So those are the steps of the historical research. So today we have learned about the what is the historical research, what is the stages of the historical research, what is the types of the historical research, what is the sources of the historical research. So I think this historical research topic is clear to you. So next day we know about the another topic of research session. So I end this class here, and next day I will come with a new topic. So thank you, take care, bye.